All right, welcome. It is Friday afternoon, at least where I am, and that means it is time for 3 questions to better business. I'm Michael Davis of Speaking CPR. Welcome. Great to see you. I'm really excited about today's guest. We haven't known each other very long, but we were introduced by a mutual friend, my mentor, Darren LaCroix, who is a world champion and certified speaking professional, and has had a huge influence on my life for literally 20 years. But he's not my guest today. He introduced me to my guest, who is Mr. Patrick McGowan. If nothing else, I just love saying the name Patrick McGowan. Patrick, welcome. You are the founder of Punchin', and you're
Yes,
not a boxer.
I'm
So
not.
just take 60 seconds or 90 seconds and tell us just a little bit about what you do.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here. In South Dakota, it's snowing. I don't know what it's doing in your neck of the woods, but it's nice to be inside and still be at home doing this over StreamYard. Punchin works with individuals who want to have more influence. Our specialty is in this world of video presence or Zoom presence, if you want to say that. And really the two problems that we're solving most often for people, number one is people who want more connection, particularly with their clients, prospects, and audience. So that could be salespeople, that could be consultants or coaches, that could be speakers. And the second problem that we solve is people who want to have more credibility. And so when you bring these things together, what I really like about this picture and about what we've been doing for people and is really when you look at connection, that there's a real empathy side to that. And when you look at credibility, in fact, you go into the root of the word credibility and you find the word heart. And so you think about empathy and you got heart on two sides of the triangle. And at the top, you've got influence. And that's where we begin to get more influence.
And that has been very tough for people since early 2020, which really is a great setup for our first question. We all know the cliche, you don't get a second chance at making a first impression. Let's
Right.
dig a little bit under that cliche, though, and talk about, especially in the video world, what is the power of the first impression now?
Yeah, that is a great question, Michael. Fundamentally, as you said, we never get a second chance to make a first impression. The second thing is that in the world, in such a hyper competitive world that we live in today and we work in today, we also have to make a good, positive, lasting impression, right? So when we put this picture together, ultimately the question I ask my clients is simply this: what story are you telling before you say a word? And so you and I have spoken briefly about what we put in our background. You've been intentional at what you've done. You've been intentional about how you've set yourself up with a webcam and you're standing, just like I have. And when we really get into that question is most often people are not intentional about how they're showing up. They're not intentional about the visual storytelling that's going on. Let me just add one thing here. Alfred Hitchcock. That's a hard one for me to say sometimes,
especially on a Friday afternoon.
I know, right? But Alfred Hitchcock was the one who said you should be able to watch a movie with the sound off and to get a good idea of what it's about. Now that's movies.
Yeah.
What we're dealing with is our Zoom presence. And I think it's really important, a picture is worth 1,000 words. When we get on video, our Zoom presence, our Zoom video is worth 1 million pictures.
Yeah. And it's worth one valuable story, as I teach my clients. It's parallel to what you just said. What are they telling themselves before you speak a word, whether you're in person or online? And if you have a background that looks like you're sloppy, you don't care, you're unprofessional, you're not going to get that business. That's just that simple. So that first impression is so powerful.
And I think I want to add to that, because I think it's really important to recognize in this day and age that how much we're requiring our clients, our prospects, our audiences to make exceptions for us.
Mm-hmm.
One of my business mentor has said, there is a point where good enough is never good enough. Yes, it may be a little bit better, but the question is it really good enough for you? What is good enough for your clients? The other question that I sometimes come back to, and I'll try not to butcher this, but it's this question of, does your video presence, does how you show up on Zoom accurately reflect the value of your products and services? So if we wanted to kind of unpack that a little bit, if we have a high level value for the products and services, and we're charging a relatively good and decent and fair price based off of that value, the question then is, where is our video reflecting that? Are we down here because we're using Fiverr to have somebody do our video production for us for $5 a pop? Or are we bringing it up to the level of what we charge and the impression and perception of that value? And so how we show up begins to speak to the value of who we are and what we deliver.
It's all about perception of value, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I've met some brilliant people who, based on what you just said, whether it's fair or not is not the question. I mean, brilliant people who give this impression that they don't know what they're talking about. They're sloppy, they're lazy. That's not true, but the way they come across creates that. And I'm going to grab a question here from my buddy Ray Engen, who says, what does a virtual background say about you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was Ray, is that right, Michael?
Yeah, Ray.
Ray, that's a great question, Ray. I think that I'm gonna give the economist answer, and the economist answer is it depends. So on the one hand, a virtual background can say a couple things. Number one, it can say that you're hiding something, and for some people that's actually important. I met with a woman just recently who works in a very sensitive environment. She has to make sure that what is in her background, because there is some intellectual property and some sensitive aspects, she has to make sure that nobody can see the space that she's in.
Sure.
And so there's always going to be an exception to the rule. I think more importantly about virtual backgrounds is, are you going further than just using a virtual background? And have you actually invested in a green screen? And I say this, and Michael and I just before this, before we got on, I joke about this, but one of the ways I say you shouldn't show up on Zoom is when you use a virtual background without a green screen, because you might suffer from the Van Gogh effect, which in other words is you might lose an ear every so often. And ultimately what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're creating something that is not distracting. You want your audience to focus on you, not on what's going on in your background. And so oftentimes when we have a virtual background, we just haven't taken the time. In most cases, most people have not taken the time to actually create the story of the set that they're going to exist on. It doesn't take a lot, but it does take some intentionality to be able to create a space that is reflective of who you are. So I think it's more about the opportunity and the possibilities of what you can do, not so much about the judgment on what they're doing with a virtual background.
Makes sense.
Does that make sense, Michael? I'm sorry, that was a little bit longer answer.
No, that's okay. We were going to possibly touch on these anyway. As I mentioned to you before we started, this is free flowing. I've got a question from Jill too before I ask that. One of the jobs I think I have as a coach when I'm working with a speaker is I'm an audience member. Yeah. We've got a phrase in our coaching group. We say, sit in the fourth row. What I ask my clients to do is sit in the fourth row of your own speech when you watch the video and ask yourself, what is this person saying? What's the message? Do I buy this person? It strikes
Right.
me we should be doing the same thing, recording our video presentations, our Zoom calls, and watching them and asking the
Yes.
same question. If I'm an audience member, does this person look professional? Is this somebody I would do business with?
Right.
Since we're
And
talking, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I'm going to add on to that, because this is something that professional actors do all the time. They're constantly looking at their game tape. I mean, any professional, anybody who is at the top of their craft, is constantly looking for ways to improve the way they do what they do. And today we've really got to learn, we've got to invest the time, money, and energy to become masters of this new medium. And I joke that, I joke about this, but at the same time, it's so true. LeBron James, when he was with the Cavs, he hired a shooting coach.
Mm-hmm.
And, but to your point, we have to watch the game tape. And the second piece to that is we also have to develop our own personal taste and style. So on the one hand, there's this idea of a professional presence. The other side of it is, am I being me? Am I being human when I'm on video? And it seems like such a easy question. It's a lot easier question to answer or ask than it is to answer and to get to a place. But that's where the practice and the rehearsal and all of that really comes into play as we develop ourselves in this new medium.
Yeah, absolutely. My buddy Darren, who we mentioned earlier, by the way, Jill loves Darren. Jill, we all love Darren. He's a teddy bear. Darren, I've been one of the coaches at his Stage Time University for several years. And 4 years ago, he called me up and said, I want you to host these weekly coaching calls. We do, they're global. And we do this thing called Zoom. And I said, I don't think so. And he's been my mentor since 2022, Patrick. And he said, what do you mean no? You never tell me no. I said, Darren, I don't want to ruin your brand because I have no clue what this is. This is going to be a disaster. And the first night, I was right. It was awful. But being a good mentor, he saw that I had a skill I couldn't see. He kept pushing me in the deep end of the pool or the Zoom room. And it was with repetition. And by the time the pandemic hit, I had 300 virtual presentations or hosting or whatever you want to call it under my belt. I had all these different experiences. And I knew the world was going to melt down emotionally because they had to do this screen thing, the screen time. And that's been a big issue. Now, I do want to point out that the Van Gogh effect has hit very close with my comedian friends who are on here. They love it. I loved it. I'd never heard that before. And Jill does have a question about lighting and camera angle. How important is that?
Yeah, no, I think it's actually essential. So lighting, there's two things that we can do with lighting. And the first mistake that people make is usually putting the light right behind their camera. And what happens is, depending on the quality of the light that you have, it may end up being too close and too bright, in which case you end up looking overexposed and flat. And that's really the last thing we want. Yes, you have better lighting than if you didn't have the lighting on the one hand, but I question whether or not it's actually better. I actually worked with a client recently. She thought she needed better lighting. She had plenty of lighting. What she needed was a better camera. And so one of the things that we have to recognize is this idea of cinematography. And yes, I'm borrowing from both film and acting in a lot of what we do here, but the art of cinematography is the partnership between your camera and lighting. So what you really want to do from a lighting standpoint is have something either at 10 o'clock. I think that I hope this shows up on the video the right way. 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock is where you want to start with the angle of your lighting. And then if you want, go ahead and get a light that has two functions. It's a 2-dial light. And the first dial is the color, because you want to be able to dial in the color, and you can use augmented lighting to be able to help with that. The other is intensity. And so you start there. So not directly behind the camera, you position them to the side at about 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock, depending on your space, and not too close. You want to get some diffusion. We don't want to eliminate to eliminate shadows and lines. We just don't want to have it. We don't want them hard lines and hard and dark shadows. So that's really where we want to try to achieve that.
Yeah, I've got a
Does that
couple
answer the whole question? There was a second part,
It
Michael?
does. It does. Just about lighting and camera angle, which I can answer that one. You look straight into the camera if you want to make maximum effect. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah. No, you have to have the camera. You want the camera square. You want you to be square. You don't want it going up at an angle or looking down at an angle, right? So there are those I saw early in the pandemic. There was a CEO was giving a interview, and I watched the webinar. He was standing in front of his iPad, which was sitting on like the kitchen table. Unfortunately, the CEO looked like a Muppet, who might have been a dictator, because we're all looking up at him. So this is another one of my 16 ways not to show up on Zoom. Is you don't want to be the dictator where the camera angle is looking up. And I call it the dictator because if you ever watch, anytime you watch, state television out of Cuba, Fidel Castro was always up on the balcony and everybody was always below him. And so we want to make sure that we're not giving that impression. Position the camera at eye level, and with a laptop in particular, if you need to, just put it on a stack of cookbooks. And then close your clamshell about 2 to 3 degrees. And what you're doing is you're playing with a wide angle lens that's on your on either webcam or on your laptop webcam. And that helps to square the image just a little bit. And it also helps in terms of your own posture. You're not looking down the whole time, which I am convinced is one of the leading factors for Zoom fatigue, because we put the laptop on the desktop and then we're always hunched over. We become kind of the hunchback on these Zoom calls. And it's just not, one, it's not comfortable. And two, you don't look your best. You're not showing up as your best self because of the camera angle.
Yeah, it makes sense. And Jill points out really good comments today. Jill pointed out that ring lights can look odd because of the reflection in the eyes. And also, I'm not sure, she's talking probably about both of us. We're both showing a lot of torso versus all face and head that a lot of people do. What are your thoughts on showing some torso?
Oh, that's a great question, Jill. What I do is, number one, is I try to position the camera just below the heart. And the reason why, and then what I do up here is, and this is coming from the casting director for shows like Law and Order and a number of the other crime dramas out of New York City. And you don't want the negative space above the head on that aspect, but I recommend minimum heart level, because this is where we gesture. We don't gesture at belly button level, we gesture near the heart. And so if you can frame yourself like this actually gives you a lot of stature, and it actually helps with the posture. So we're talking about having presence on camera. The old rule, Michael, you know this from your live speaking days, when you're on stage, the rule is to command the stage, right?
Right. Absolutely.
If you're doing a small group presentation, you're in a small room with a small team or a group of professionals, you want to command the room. Today, we really have to look at this as, how do we frame ourselves in a way to command the stage or command the screen? That's the reality with our Zoom presence. And part of that comes with the gesturing. They're not overdone, but they're usually heart level.
Okay, great tip. I hadn't heard that. I knew about the space here, but I love the heart level concept. And you talk about framing. The last 2 years, Toastmasters International has done their World Championship of Public Speaking contest virtually.
Oh.
And it was fascinating to watch, especially last year, the winner, Mike Carr. He absolutely used the speaking space. He went all the way to the back corner. He was over here. He came in at one point down here. Well, I'm going to look on the camera. He came up from here. It was masterful. And he asked the question, how can I be different? And this year's winner, Verity Price, she did the same thing. She did a great job of using that area. I tell people all the time, you don't have to stay here solid in the
Mm-hmm.
middle. Sometimes you might
Yep.
want to step forward and make a point. Don't stay there. It gets creepy. Come back,
Right.
go left, go right. Use the kind of the vertical, go horizontal, go perpendicular. I mean, do all those different things. This is where geometry that we took in school
Yes.
is really going to help us. You said
Yeah.
you'd never use it again. Yes, you will. You're going to use it
Yeah.
now. So
yeah, you got a lot of space here. It's okay to move. It's okay to gesture. This is another reason why there's a drawback to any kind of virtual background, because when you wave your hands, things will tend to distort, and that just becomes another sort of distraction. It lessens the quality, if you would. So we got to really be careful. There are hardware ways to fix that, but in most cases, for most people, any kind of movement with a green screen tends to show some level of distortion. But I love the fact that you brought those two examples up. We are free to move in this space. From a general composition, we've all heard the rule of thirds lately, but that's a starting point, right? The rule of thirds is a starting point, and maybe it's your line of sight. This is where you come back to. This is your gravitational point. But ultimately, you've got the whole space to work with. One of the things that people always ask me is, is this a virtual background or is this a real background? And I'll go back, just like I did, and pull a book off the shelf. And the fun part about it is I can do that with my camera and everything else set up like that, and then go ahead and put the book back.
You know, I haven't tried that yet, because people ask me too, and I just like, look right there. Okay, it's my son. It's virtual. It's not virtual. Yeah. All right, let's take a look into 2022. I tell people all the time, meeting planners in the speaking world are saying, this isn't going away, folks. I tell this to all my clients. That is, you have to be as good on camera as you are in person, and that is never going to change, because meeting planners need to know that in a pinch, when the next virus hits or the next lockdown, who knows? It could be an act of terrorism, whatever. If we have to stay in our homes again, can you be as good on camera as you are in person? Which leads us to this question: what do you see 2022? How will Zoom presence impact us 2022 and it really beyond?
Yeah, that is a great question, Michael. I think that number one, I think your Zoom, we have to come mentally and emotionally to this idea that our Zoom presence is how we show up on Zoom can make or break our success. So 2020 was an opportunity for everybody to just get on Zoom, get familiar. We all had a learning curve. One of the quotes that I come back to, one of my principles is simply, you have to trust your training. 2022 was clear that nobody had any training, or very few did, right? 2021, we begin to see people inch a little bit more and more to better quality. I think 2022 is going to be the year where people say, no, I'm stepping it up. This isn't going away. In fact, I just spoke to a client who admitted to me on a call. She's like, I've just been complacent. I thought this was going to go away in 2 weeks, and here it is 2 years and I haven't done anything. So it's time for me to do something.
Yeah.
So she sees that and that reality. And I think the other aspect to this is, I think we have to, again, mentally and emotionally, we have to come to this reality that better video is an act of kindness. If what we want to do is to be able to connect with people and have more meaningful connections with people, and we want to show up with the credibility that we know we have, then we need to do something at that intersection of technology and humanity. So we need to raise both what we're using from a tool set, and we need to learn how to show up as our best self, or another way of saying it, our most wholehearted self, because that's who people want to work with. They want to work with a human being. How do we allow that technology to amplify who we are and that best self when we're showing up, when the camera gets turned on?
Patrick, I love that whole act of kindness concept. It's the same when we're live as we are in front of a camera.
Yep.
The kindest thing we can do to an audience is not be focused on ourselves.
Yes.
Even during this interview, something fell on your end. There was some
Yep.
noise. It happens. Get over it. We're all we
Right.
learned that to be accepted. Now, if it happens over and over again, we have a problem. I mean, I've got
Exactly.
2 dogs upstairs. They're pretty good. I tell them, girls, I'm going on camera. Could you hold the barking? And if I'm in good stead that day, they don't bark. But
Right.
it's going to happen. But don't worry so much about your hair and your suit and, oh my gosh, am I going to make a mistake? You're going to make mistakes. Accept it and
Mhm.
just try not to repeat it over and over. So,
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've coached people on is simply this idea of practicing the art of self-forgetfulness.
I like that.
And it's actually from a pastor out of, I think he's quoting C.S. Lewis, but I may not know that for sure. But a pastor out of New York City actually was the one where I was introduced to this idea. And it's simply that we don't, sometimes we define humility as thinking less of ourselves. We're a little lower. This isn't about thinking less of ourselves. It's about thinking of ourselves less. And what we want to do, an easy way to do that is have the confidence that you've set yourself up with your equipment well, that it's working for you, not against you. And then making sure that you're confident and comfortable with how you're showing up, that you've brought your A game to this work, and then shut off self-view. Forget about it.
Yeah.
And that, to your point, it is all about the audience from that point forward. You're there for a reason. That reason is the audience. And you trust your message. You have something valuable to say. You are a valuable person. You're there for a reason. So, and that's why the audience is there too. And your audience wants to hear from you. And there are a number of people in that audience who are eager to hear what you have to say.
Absolutely. And that's what I tell people all the time. Don't worry about yourself. They're not there to see you make mistakes. They're too busy to waste their time coming online to watch you make errors and screw up and not provide value, right? They want you to do well. If they want to see people make mistakes and look foolish, that's why they invented YouTube. All right, I'm going to go
Yeah.
to my third question. Mitra, one of our other comedian friends here, says, "Forget about yourself, question mark. It's so much easier said for men to do that than women."
Yeah.
That's great, Mitra. All right. All
Yeah.
right. Now, and now I know there are more than 5 common mistakes, but what are
Yeah.
5 big or common mistakes you see people making on Zoom? I know you've already touched upon a couple of them.
Yeah, we did. So we talked about the camera and the lighting. We've talked about green screens, where the mistakes are with green screens and virtual backgrounds. We also even talked about the camera angle. So there's 3 or 4 in there. I think a couple more for people to realize. I think let me think here, because those were my top 4. I think the biggest mistake people will often make is they'll justify not looking at the camera.
Okay.
And I just actually spoke to a gentleman this afternoon, just a couple hours ago, and he's growing in his comfortableness to, when he's addressing somebody, to actually look at the camera. And he said, and he put it in, I believe his words were, I'm making friends with the camera, and I'm looking through the lens. And I think that is such a great description of how to approach this. So often, there was a gal who was in one of my workshops recently, and she stopped us in the middle of the workshop and she said, "Okay, I get what you're doing here." And I said, "Okay, what is that, Christine?" And she said, "You're going to make it so we like being on this side of the camera." And I think the mistake, though, is we think that by looking at our monitor the whole time, people are just going to accept the fact that we're looking at them.
Yeah, no, they're not.
And so here's my challenge to everybody, and this is one of the 16 ways not to show up on Zoom, but it's simply this: is that I call that the wall talker. Imagine if you were having a conversation with somebody in person, in a room and they never looked at you. They never made eye contact. In fact, what they did is everything that you said, they would nod and everything like that, but they were literally looking at the wall the whole time. So if I start talking to you like this, Michael, how does that actually make you feel?
Patrick, I have no idea what you're talking about. How can you possibly think that this would bother me?
Exactly. So I think the thing, and I appreciate Mitra's question here is, how do you create a connection if you're not looking at the individual? And I think the way that I advise people is, you have your camera here at eye level, you bring your monitor to the side, and there's a little bit that we give up by not looking directly at the monitor all the time. We look at the camera about 70% of the time, give or take. When we're communicating with them, we set up the monitor so we can see people in our peripheral vision and see the macro gestures rather than the micro gestures. Mm-hmm. The second part of that rule is I will call an audible. And what I mean by that is I'll say, sometimes you're going to see me talk to you this way, and sometimes you're going to see me look at my monitor because I want to get a good idea. I'm going to ask a question here, and I'm going to look for your reaction here and see who's got a question or a comment or something like that. And then I come back here. So this is always my line of sight. This is my 60 to 70% solution. This is my 30 to 40% solution, depending on the event and the engagement.
Okay. Patrick, I'm a little slow, but something just occurred to me when you were saying that, based on Mitra's question. Pre-pandemic, I don't know if people remember this. We used to use these things called phones, where we would actually talk to people and not look at them. And I don't know why, just occurred to me 2 years into the pandemic. How do we effectively connect with people on the phone? And how do we get in tune with what they're saying? We listen. And we don't just listen to the words, we listen to the tonality, intonation, and the emotion. And that's exactly what we're doing when we look on the camera. Now, this is not, if you're giving a webinar and you're the only one speaking, this is different. But if you're having conversation like what you and I are doing, I'm not looking at you on screen, but I'm listening to the words you're saying and how you're saying it.
Yeah. And actually, Michael, I have mine set up where, like, I've commandeered my family room in our house. And so I literally have a big screen TV behind my camera. So I've got a digital camera that I've set up. I can see when you nod, and it's really it helps me to know that I'm at least connecting on that level. And every once in a while, you see me glance over here at the monitor, and sometimes I look up at the monitor just to kind of see you. But that's enough information. I think the other side of this question, though, is, let me see if I can formulate this verbally. The other side of the question is recognizing, are you trying to connect with your audience or your clients or prospects by looking at them, or are you trying to get them to connect with you? And when somebody feels that you are there, that you are present, they're going to respond. And the way that they're going to know that you are there and you are present is when it appears that you're making eye contact with them.
Yeah. So
I do it as a first principle. I want to create eye contact with people. I want them to see my eyes and have them. This is that partnership across the lens. I can see enough in terms of the macro gestures, the way I have things set up, that allows me to know that I'm making some connection.
Oh, I love that. And I love these conversations because they stir other ideas. And I've been telling folks that when we go back to primarily live presenting, we're going to be better if we've been doing everything that you've recommended in this call today. Yes. Talk to the camera, because first of all, there will be cameras in most rooms going forward.
Yep.
And we have to treat that camera like another audience member, because there are a lot of faces on the other side, and we've got to talk with it. One of the things Darren was doing 2-3 years before the pandemic, he was doing the hybrid model. So we were getting some experience with it already. The last live event he did before the lockdown, I was looking into a camera sometimes, had no idea how much that was going to benefit me down the road, but we have to get used to that. But I love all these suggestions you've given us today. There's been so much value in this. I'd love to hear more, but I do want to respect everyone's time. So with that said, you have mentioned, well, first of all, I want to show people how to connect with you. You can go to patrick@punchin.io. Is that correct?
There's a small typo in there, Michael. The website is correct. The URL or my email does not have the I in Punchin. It's just PUNCHN.
Okay. I'll make that correction. I'm going to put this under the video when I put the show notes. So apologize about that. I had it on the website. So
it's an easy mistake.
So they can reach you that way. Also, go reach out to Patrick on LinkedIn, and I'm going to put your LinkedIn link underneath the video too when I share that tomorrow. Now, coming soon, I want to also point out that with so much wisdom today, you got a new book coming out in March 2022. It's called Across the Lens: How Your Zoom Presence Can Make or Break Your Success. Yes. Anything in particular about that book we should be looking out for?
I think it's the approach. One of the things that I continue to come back to, there are those who are in the market to help you do sort of a Zoom makeover. Mm-hmm. I'm not a Zoom makeover artist. I'm much more about you coming alive on Zoom. And so what you're going to see in the book is my three sort of pillar process, which is prepare, position, and punch. And the prepare and the position side of it is really the who. It's the fire in your belly. It's also what makes you unique, to just kind of give it a real short form. Mm-hmm. And then the punch is everything we've been talking about in terms of camera, lighting, audio, staging, and framing, plus our best practice, right? So when we bring that package together and we begin to practice it, you're going to start seeing some really, really wonderful connection and response from your audience as a result.
Well, that's great. I look forward to getting it. And if we're on LinkedIn with you, I'm sure you'll be promoting it close to release date. So we'll definitely get that. Well, Patrick, I had no idea that when we started today that I was going to hear about dictators, Muppets, Van Gogh, the 2% rule, and all these other wonderful tips. So I appreciate your wisdom. I look forward to future conversations with you. And you definitely connect with Patrick, get on LinkedIn with him, because he will be a wealth of information for you. I also want to point out Corey, who is sitting in the green room. Corey, any questions or any thoughts from you before we go? I'm gonna add you on here real quick because you were brave enough to sit in the green room.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Oh, all I want to say is thank you. I'm really intrigued by all this reflection on how the world has changed and the different ways that people have approached those changes. And frankly, there are not many people talking about this, at least that I've found. And so to have two intelligent people talking about what all this means and what it's going to mean for our future, I'm just grateful for your leadership. So thank you.
Well, I thank you for saying that I'm intelligent. That's my drop the mic moment. No, so we appreciate you being here, Corey. So thank you for those comments. And there are, because I'm in this world, and so is Patrick, there are a lot of people in our world talking about it. I don't think they go very in depth, and that's one of the big reasons I wanted Patrick on here today, because when we met, I thought, this guy knows some things I haven't been talking about when it comes to video and presence, because it's so critical going forward. So, thank you for that, Corey. Appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks, Corey.
And Patrick, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to tell all of our viewers, coming next week, coming soon to a live stream near you, I'm going to be interviewing my friend Deb Coviello. Deb is the president of the Drop-In CEO. She's got a great podcast. She talks to CEOs of all levels, from the largest multinational corporations down to 1 and 2 people companies. She's got some great leadership insights. So join us for that. Thank you for joining us today. I will be posting this video tomorrow with all the show notes and links to Patrick and all of his excellent work. We did want to mention one other thing, the 16 things not to do, correct? That'll also be in the notes, but tell us real quick what that's about.
Well, 16 ways not to show up on Zoom, however you want to frame that. But I mentioned a few of them, including the Van Gogh effect and the dictator. But there's obviously a whole slew of them. Somebody put in the comments the witness protection program. That's obviously a favorite out there. But I've collected there's a whole collection of these now that I've compiled, and it's been a lot of fun to put that together. It's fun. It's a little bit of a poke the bear, but overall, I think everybody will get a lot out of it. I think if you would like a copy of that PDF, just when Michael posts this out online, or reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, I'll be happy to get that emailed out to you.
Yeah, because I'll put the correct email in the notes. And I put out a report last year, and I'm looking for it because I'm sure yours has more depth. It's called Stop Zoom Burnout Now. I'll include that below too. It has 34 tips. So between the two of us, there are 50 ideas on how to get a little bit better on video and Zoom, but we've got to do it because it is here to stay. It is going to be a major part of how we connect, how we lead, and how we sell into the future. So, Patrick, I appreciate you. I appreciate the time today, and look forward to talking with you soon.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everybody.